Rick Crusher Dalton was a towering man, built like a powerhouse, with a face that told 1,000 stories of mischief and mayhem. His rugged appearance was complete with a thick, scruffy beard, a weathered leather jacket, and that ever-present smirk, the kind that made people wonder if he was about to crack a joke or start trouble. His biker gang wasn't just a group of followers. They were his devoted crew, hanging on his every word, waiting for the next wild challenge, the next outrageous stunt to prove that they were the toughest, the baddest, the most fearless bunch around. That day, the gang rumbled into a sleepy little town, the kind of place where the biggest excitement was probably a fresh batch of cookies at the local bakery. The sun cast long shadows on the peaceful streets, the air thick with tranquility. But Rick, he had other ideas. He wasn't one for quiet. He craved excitement, laughter, a bit of chaos. And what better way to stir things up than to make an entrance? Their motorcycles growled like caged beasts as they pulled up in front of a quaint little café, shattering the stillness. Heads turned. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. The townsfolk, accustomed to slow, uneventful days, stiffened at the sight of the rough-looking crew. Some people sitting at outdoor tables instinctively lowered their gazes, silently hoping the bikers would just pass through, that this wasn't the start of something unpleasant. But Rick? Oh, Rick loved this. The attention, the nervous glances, the unspoken fear, it was fuel to his fire. He threw his head back with a loud, hearty laugh, soaking in the tension, the uncertainty. Then, something at the cafe entrance caught his sharp, mischief-filled eyes. 2 dogs. Not just any dogs. These were well-groomed, disciplined, and exuded a quiet confidence. One, a golden retriever, sat with a calm, gentle expression, its honey-colored fur gleaming in the sunlight. The other, a Doberman, muscular and poised, sat with an air of authority, eyes scanning the world with sharp focus. They weren't just pets, they were something more, something refined. Rick smirked and elbowed one of his gang members, chuckling under his breath. "Look at these pampered little princes," he sneered. "They're living better than we are." His gang laughed along, though some of them sensed where this was going and weren't sure if they liked it. Rick, always eager to put on a show, decided to have a little fun. Without hesitation, he lifted his heavy boot and nudged the golden retriever's side, not a brutal kick, but firm enough to startle the poor creature. The retriever yelped in shock, stumbling back, its warm, trusting eyes suddenly filled with confusion and fear. The Doberman instantly rose, muscles tensed, ears pricked forward. It didn't snarl, didn't lunge, it was too well trained for that. But its body language screamed one thing: this is a warning. The air went still. The entire street seemed to hold its breath. A woman in the cafe gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth. A waitress, mid-stride with a tray of drinks, froze, her fingers losing their grip. The tray crashed to the ground, sending cups and plates scattering. A small child, clutching an ice cream cone, squeezed it so tightly in shock that the scoop plopped to the pavement. Rick laughed, loud, confident, completely unfazed. He turned to his gang, waiting for them to join in. Some chuckled hesitantly, but one of them muttered under his breath, maybe that wasn't the best idea." Rick scoffed. "Come on, it's just a dog," he shrugged. "Just a little fun." What Rick didn't know, what nobody in his gang realized, was that these weren't just any dogs. They belonged to Jason Statham. And Jason had been watching everything. Inside the cafe, sitting near a sunlit window, a man had been quietly enjoying his tea. His face, sharp and unreadable, gave nothing away, but his eyes were another story. They flickered with something unreadable, something cold, something dangerous. Everything had been peaceful, serene even, until that sharp, sudden yelp shattered the moment. His hand, poised midair with his cup, stilled. His gaze lifted, locked onto the scene outside. His golden retriever, his loyal companion, flinched back in fear. His Doberman stood, poised for action. And then his eyes met Rick's. The biker was still laughing. Slowly, with the precision of a man who never rushed, Jason placed his cup back on its saucer. The faint clink of ceramic against ceramic rang through the café, small, insignificant, yet somehow final. The café owner, an older man with kind eyes, had seen it all, too. His face drained of color as realization set in. He took a cautious step toward Jason, lowering his voice. "Sir, I think that biker just made a very big mistake." Jason Statham didn't answer. He didn't need to. He simply stood. Not in anger, not in haste, just stood. His movements were slow, deliberate, controlled. He wasn't a man who needed to shout to command attention. He didn't have to make threats. His presence was the threat. As he took a step toward the door, the café's patrons exchanged nervous glances. Their hands trembled as they reached for their drinks, their food, anything to make them look busy, as if ignoring the storm brewing before them could make it disappear. Because they knew. Crusher Dalton had no idea what kind of storm he had just unleashed. But he was about to find out. Just a man, enjoying a quiet afternoon with his loyal dogs. No trouble, no disturbance, just peace. But when trouble had come knocking at his door, he had faced it head-on. Not with rage. Not with recklessness. No, Jason Statham had handled it with something far more powerful, calm, controlled strength. And now, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting golden hues over the little town, one undeniable truth lingered in everyone's minds. Rick and his gang had made the biggest mistake of their lives. Time passed, but the story remained. Days rolled by, and life in the small town gradually returned to its normal rhythm. The gentle hum of daily activity filled the streets once more. The bakery served fresh bread in the morning, the little antique shop welcomed curious visitors, and the cozy café remained the go-to spot for locals to gather, sip their coffee, and chat about anything and everything. But one conversation never seemed to fade.
People still whispered about that day.
The day Jason Statham had walked into their lives like an approaching storm, silent at first, but impossible to ignore. And just like that, he was gone again, vanishing into the distance like the wind. But the lesson he left behind? That would remain forever. At the café, the owner still chuckled every time someone brought up the infamous incident. Shaking his head, he'd grin and say, "I've seen plenty of so-called tough guys come through this town. Big boots, loud voices, thinking they own the place. But him." He'd pause, eyes gleaming with admiration. He didn't even break a sweat. And then there was the little boy, the one who had timidly reached out to pat Jason's dog that day. He told the story again and again, acting out every detail for his friends, his tiny hands mimicking the swift movements he had seen. And then bam! He'd shout excitedly. He moved so fast. The biker didn't even know what hit him. Crusher Dalton, gone without a trace. But what about Rick and his gang?
Gone.
Vanished. Nowhere to be seen. Not a single one of them had dared to return to that town. Not since that day. And, honestly, no one missed them. The town's peace remained undisturbed, its streets safe once more. The message had been received loud and clear. Some people are not to be messed with. A new traveler, a different story. One afternoon, the distant growl of a motorcycle echoed through the town once again. For a brief moment, a few townsfolk tensed, their hands pausing in their daily tasks. Was it them? Were the bikers back? But as the lone rider rolled into view, their fears melted away. This wasn't Rick. This wasn't his gang. Just a simple traveler passing through, like so many before. The cafe owner, ever the welcoming spirit, smiled warmly. "Come on in, stranger," he called, gesturing toward an empty seat. Because if there was one thing the town had learned, it was this. Not all bikers were troublemakers. And more importantly, not all quiet men were weak. Some carried a strength so deep, so undeniable, that it never needed to be proven, unless the situation demanded it. And Jason Statham?
He was one of those men.
The legend lives on. As the last light of the sun faded beyond the hills, the town carried on, forever changed yet comfortingly the same. Life continued, safe and steady. And somewhere out there, beyond the winding roads and open highways, Jason Statham and his steadfast companions, his loyal dogs, moved on to their next destination, leaving behind nothing but a story. A story that would be told and retold